Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
Drawing on experiences from governments across the globe, a new trends report focuses less on prediction and more on how public institutions respond when resources are tight and systems are under strain. We'll talk about what those shared lessons suggest for decision-making ahead with the Executive Director of the Center for Government Insights at Deloitte, Bill Eggers. Bill, welcome back to the show. It's great to have you.
It's so great to be with you as always, Terry.
We are going to dig into Deloitte's 2026 Government Trends Report. But before we talk about 2026, I want to turn the clock back a little bit and talk about 2025. It was a tumultuous year for federal agencies here in the U.S. and for governments worldwide. This is a global report that you guys are talking about. How did all of the disruption in 2025 affect what rose to the top of your list in trends for 2026?
Well, the biggest takeaway from 2025 was that the environment has just outpaced the way it was designed. We're now operating in an environment defined by AI accelerating quickly. You've got tighter fiscal constraints worldwide, workforce strain, risks that cascade across systems as we're seeing on almost a daily basis. And in that context, incremental reform really struggles to keep up. That's why this year's trends moved upstream. Instead of focusing on improving delivery at the margins, we really focus on redesigning how government actually works. Its rules, workflows, decision rights, platforms, learning loops. And for federal agencies, there really are a few practical implications. And the first is that you can't wait for stability to return. The environment isn't going to slow down. And second, technology alone won't fix broken processes. The biggest gains come when AI is paired with simpler rules, redesigned workflows, clearer accountability. And we're already starting to see that. At the IRS, they were able to simplify internal rules and then apply an automated contract review tool to reduce review times from hours to just minutes. And that's really the broader point, is that technology delivers the most value when it reinforces redesign, not when it's layered onto complexity.
Bill, one of the things that the Trump administration did last year was sort of sweep out a lot of bureaucratic underbrush. Regardless of whether you think they did it right or wrong, a lot of obstacles to change like that are removed now. So how does that, for federal agencies who are thinking about change, give them a clearer path? Does it erase the old whiteboard and now they can write something new?
I think there's so many opportunities right now to really change and redesign the whole operating system of government. And that is one of the biggest messages from trends this year. You know, when we look at trends over time, we've looked at digitization, future readiness, breaking silos, delivery excellence. And this time they all come together into this deeper area in terms of a new operating system. And so that's what we mean by changing the machinery underneath government. And there's an incredible opportunity to do that, whether it's rules and workflows, partner ecosystems, feedback loops. And so the shift is really about moving from reform as an event to adaptation as a system. And that's really a fundamental change. And it also changes, Terry, the way we think about AI. In earlier editions and in other discussions we've had, AI really showed up as an enabling capability. But in 2026, it's embedded in how government works, in service delivery, regulation, procurement, workforce design. So for federal agencies, the question is no longer where should we pilot AI, but how do we redesign work, redesign systems and accountability around it?
Bill, I want to go back to something that you said about the government operating systems, the way that work is designed and gets done. And of course, the report argues for the need to change rapidly. And yet we certainly find in our own country that there are a lot of organizations that are literally invested, like have money riding on the status quo. So for an innovative government leader, it can be really hard to overcome that inertia, that focus on keeping things the same. How do you see governments around the world overcoming that?
Well, I think there's always been that issue, of course, Terry, in government and in private companies and all kinds of systems like that. That's not new. But what we are seeing today, I think, is that the pressures to change between tighter resources and these sort of massive changes brought about by AI have become a real forcing function. And I think that what we're seeing around the world is that forcing function is actually causing a lot of that inertia to start to go away in different ways, because you cannot face today's challenges with an industrial age government operating model. And that's really a theme of the trends. And we focus on a lot of innovators in the My Takes who are just doing amazing things, whether it's Santi Garces in Boston around permitting reform, or we look at Sydney Metro Station and what Peter Regan has done using public-private partnerships to modernize that system in a way that would have been almost unthinkable just a few years ago, where it's all autonomous and they brought in billions of dollars of private capital into it. So I think the operating environment that governments are operating in is forcing some of these much bigger changes in a way that I don't think we've seen in years, if not decades.
I'm speaking with Bill Eggers. He's the executive director of the Center for Government Insights at Deloitte. Well, Bill, some of those examples you just rattled off sounded like people fairly high up in their organizations who have authority over change. But not everybody that's listening to our conversation right now has responsibility or controls budget or strategy. So for folks who are in the middle of an organization and want to try to change their operating space, how should they apply these trends to what they're working on?
Well, I think for most career staff and others, the biggest takeaway isn't necessarily that they always have to think bigger. It's to look closer at how their work actually happens. And the Trends Report, I think, is very useful as a lens onto their own workflows. Where are the handoffs? Where is data entered multiple times? Where are approvals adding time but not value? And that's where the real opportunity is. And so for program managers, it often means organizing work around outcomes rather than org charts. Instead of asking, which unit owns this, ask, what outcome are we trying to deliver and how should the work be structured around that? Or if you're on an acquisition team, the lesson is pretty straightforward. Simplify before you digitize. You want to strip out unnecessary steps, clarify decision points, and then apply AI and other tools. And that's what we're already seeing with the FAR rewrite of procurement rules. We're seeing that in the DoD with their software acquisition pathway and various other initiatives. And if you're on the regulatory staff, oversight, the shift is really from a blanket review to much smarter reviews. One-stop portals, automated pre-checks, risk-based monitoring. The goal is not less oversight. It's more targeted, more effective oversight. And lastly, for the broader workforce, I think the most practical takeaway is AI fluency. In the report, we frame it pretty simply. We talk about use, choose, and build. What we mean by that is most people need AI to use AI safely in their daily work, and those are the users. Some will need to choose which tools to use and make judgment calls. That is the group around choose. And then a smaller group actually needs to build. And programs like State Chat, the Department of State, show how that can be done responsibly. So I think the practical message is the biggest changes in government won't necessarily start at the top. They'll start where people in the middle of the work actually redesign how that work gets done.
Bill, there's a quote in here that really caught my eye. Agencies that modernize only on the surface may find that old constraints reassert themselves. So if an agency is looking at this and thinking about only maybe acting on one or two ideas, that's all they think they have the capacity for, what would you suggest? Where should they start to make sure that the changes aren't just on the surface?
Well, I'd start with a simple filter. Where is the mission under the most pressure? and where are the conditions already in place to act? So in other words, where is the mission risk high? Where is workforce strain visible? And where does the agency have enough readiness already in terms of their data, authority, leadership support to move right now? So you don't necessarily have to start with the most exciting idea, but you start where the problem is real and the conditions for change exist. And for many federal agencies, that points to things that I mentioned already. Procurement, it's enterprise-wide, measurable, tangible. You can simplify pathways, clarify decision rights, and then apply tools. By applying these technology tools, you can quickly improve speed, supplier access, and outcomes. And that's why the procurement reset we talk about can deliver early wins. And second, human and AI collaboration. It's really not just deploying tools, but redesigning how people and AI work together. That means you have to have clear decision rules, you have to have AI fluency across the workforce, and workflows need to be designed around outcomes, not just processes. Because most agencies, they don't have a technology gap. They have a work design gap. And so if an agency has a strong digital foundation, then it can go further into adaptive operating models with shared platforms and mission teams. And the key is not to start where the trend that they find the most interesting necessarily, but it's to start where redesign will make the biggest difference and can actually stick.
That is a super helpful focus. When you think about that perspective, where do you think the U.S. government will make the most progress in the coming year?
Well, I certainly think in the procurement area, with what's happening in terms of simplifying FAR and the huge momentum around procurement reform, I think that is one area where I see a lot of momentum there. Number two, I think the U.S. government, both at the federal level and we're also seeing at the state and local level, are some of the most aggressive governments in the world right now around actually deploying AI and really looking at all the different processes and looking at how to re-architect and redesign that work around AI. I think the US has a couple years head start in some respects over some other governments that we've seen along those lines. And then also with a lot of the pressures that we're seeing around everything from housing affordability to energy and environment, around regulatory reform and a regulatory reset. That's, I would say, the third area where I see a lot of progress already happening and a lot of momentum for further change.
I've been speaking with Bill Eggers. He's Executive Director of the Center for Government Insights at Deloitte. Bill, really appreciate you walking through the headlines of the report with us.
Thanks so much, Terry.
We'll post this interview and a link to the report at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.